Well, after what feels like forever, I'm back again to finish off the third and final part of this year's series of playing a new game every day for a month. Since it's been so long, I better quickly run back through what this challenge was all about. In the month of January, I decided to play a new game. Well, a new game to me at least. Something I'd never played before. Every day for a month. And make a video out of what I thought about each game. Kinda like 31 little mini reviews of these games, but only after a couple of hours play each. I also decided to bring anyone who wanted to join in along for the ride, as every day this was streamed over on my Twitch channel. I did this last year as well, so I thought going into this, I knew how it would play out. But nope, this was a seriously mixed bag of games. I'll leave a link to parts 1 and 2, which came out earlier in the year, if you're interested in them after watching this. Anyway, that's enough of my babbling. Let's get on to the games I subjected myself to. Kicking off day 21, I thought I should play something a bit different. I've played many of the Pokemon games in my time, but they've either been the mainline titles or the major spin-offs, the ones that are more of an RPG style, contained story, like Gale of Darkness. So I had largely ignored the Mystery Dungeon series, even though I do have a few of them in the collection, when I've just stumbled across them cheap at car boot sales or in charity shops. This version is a remake and amalgamation of Red and Blue Rescue Team, which appeared on the Nintendo DS. I knew in the games you played as Pokemon, but I wasn't expecting it to be a story of someone who was turned into a Pokemon. But you do get to choose who you want to play as, and of course, I chose the best ever. Good old Psyduck. From here on out, you set up a mystery team, which if you want to know, is a for-hire agency comprised of Pokemon who go out to rescue other Pokemon from whatever shenanigans they've got themselves into. The game plays out as a grid-based dungeon crawler, where if you bump into enemies, you just trade blows until you or the foe faints. This game is a roguelike though, so the dungeons you traverse are randomised, but the end goal is always the same. The Pokemon you're looking for will be on one of these floors of the dungeon you're traipsing around. I don't know why, but this game reminded me of something like Gauntlet. I think it's just the way you stand there just trading blows. There are many games in the Mystery Dungeon style, and they're all by Spike Chunsoft, and they all resemble their original game, Shiren the Wanderer. These other titles include the likes of Dragon Quest and the Chocobos from Final Fantasy. To be honest, the game was entertaining for the 2 hours I played, but I can imagine it gets stale pretty quickly. For me, a game with a repetitive loop like this needs something to be working on, such as achievements. Since the Switch doesn't have these, it didn't feel like it offered much of a reason to keep playing other than the story, which to be honest seemed rather forgettable. I can see why this worked on a handheld such as the DS, as it's easily portable and can be played in short bursts. Hear me out though, I know the Switch is also handheld, but I find it too bulky to take with me, and if I'm at home it just sits in the dock. This is mainly because I'd rather use something like a Pro Controller rather than the Joy-Cons. I just find them uncomfortable. I'm not sure this is one that I would pull off the shelf again to play for long sessions, but it feels blasphemous saying it, but it would probably benefit from owning this one digitally rather than physically. This is just due to the ease of access of digital titles. It would allow quick and easy play sessions that this game would be suited for. I can't see somebody digging around on the shelf for a cartridge if they're only going to play for 10 or 20 minutes. I had to give Gadget Racers a go, as I needed to know how the game played since I know people are dropping hundreds on it for a copy on the GameCube. Luckily I have the PS2 version, which was gifted to me by Eddie of Rollicor. It's part of the long-running Choro Q series, which started way back on the MSX in Japan. It's based on a line of small collectible toy cars, but strangely, you may have played one of the games in the series before and never even known it. That's because in the English-speaking world, they've come out under quite a few different names, such as, of course, Gadget Racers, but also Penny Racers and Road Trip. In these games, you just race to earn money to buy parts for your car to upgrade them to take on bigger and better races. Where these games differ is a lot of the games in the series, including this one, take a more of a car PG gameplay loop. You have a hub world you're free to explore and chat to other cars and do missions for them. In turn, this also earns parts for your car. I found that you spend more time doing fetch quests for these NPC cars than racing, but it's all part of its charm. It's an overall strange experience, but I enjoyed it. You will also find at the beginning of the game the handling is absolutely dreadful until you've started to work on the upgrades. Like at the beginning it feels almost unplayable, but soon enough it will become a competent little racer. It's not going to change your life or anything, but if you're after a different spin on your cutesy racing games, it's worth a play. Or maybe not the GameCube version, there's plenty of other games in the series though that you can give a go for cheap. Even the PS1 Japanese exclusives have English patches these days, so if you have the means to apply them, go for it. I've recently beaten the game on the GBA called Road Trip Shifting Gears. This is the US name for it though, the PAL one I think might also just be called Gadget Racers. I don't know, the series gets a little confusing with not sticking to one name. This one though was more of a straightforward track racer, without the hub, but you still had all the upgrading and that available. I'm definitely going to have to try out more in the series down the line. I do have some others lying about I think. I do like a quirky racer. to see a copy of The Bouncer sitting on a store shelf, you would be forgiven for thinking it's another Square RPG. The main character, Scion, looks like a prototype for Sora from Kingdom Hearts, and he takes up the majority of the game's box art. Luckily, I knew going into this it was actually a 3D beat-em-up game, and that it was rather short. So unlike others before me who dropped money on this when it first released, I knew what I was getting myself into. And you know what? It's definitely short. Only after roughly 2.5 hours, the credits were rolling. Many would see this as a problem, but like Gungrave, which I played last year, this felt like the perfect length for this type of game. Any longer and it would have gotten incredibly stale. I really enjoyed the presentation of this game. It had the usual high quality Squaresoft FMV cutscenes, and the characters were big and detailed when they were on screen during gameplay. I won't spoil the story, but it goes to places you don't expect, involving shapeshifters and robots. So your standard Japanese soap opera. Throughout the game you level up your character and flesh out their moveset, which didn't seem too shabby for a 3D beat 'em up. The game gives you plenty of options to save and upgrade, but I would advise using the save points wherever possible, as death kicks you back to the title screen. They should have just included the checkpoint system, as loading back into the game takes longer than it should to retry and go again after dying. But if you do use every save point, the amount of progress you lose is minuscule, so the loading is the only thing getting in the way of jumping back into the action. It just feels like a pointless step that's just getting in the way. I played through the game with Scion, as he's on the case and he seemed like that's where you should start. But there are two other playable characters, these being Volt and Kouyu. It's spelled K-O-U, I don't know how that's pronounced. Towards the end of the game there are long sections of fighting robots which no matter how much I tried, I would just get taken down, so I resorted to running past a lot of them and only killing the ones that would cause a new area to open. Running past did help though, as it spread the enemies out, and if I did have to face them, it was on much more of a one-to-one basis. Fighting in this game felt like the early Tekken games, but I'm pretty sure it was based off the engine of Tobal No. 1, since that's a Squaresoft release. Overall, if you want a nice quick game to play and don't mind a lot of cutscenes, I'd recommend this one. Kept me entertained enough to do it in one sitting at least. If I hadn't already played Big Pharma in this year's challenge, Falling Stars would have easily taken the top spot for the steamiest pile of shit I played that month. It's one that's always intrigued me, as the case just looks like a cutesy RPG. Even reading the back of the box, it bills itself as an RPG with many hours of action, but aimed for a younger audience. This is a lie. You're thrust into a PAL-exclusive colourful hellscape where you see more loading screens than actual gameplay. In the hour and a half I had played, I walked around the same garden doing pointless back and forth tasks for some of the ugliest character models on the PS2. It seemed to mostly involve people only talking to you if you were wearing the right coloured outfit, which wouldn't have been bad if the wardrobe didn't take so long to load that I thought the game had crashed every time. After about 45 minutes, I did actually get to play some of the combat. It looks like your standard turn-based affair, but it works on some kind of colour system, with different colours corresponding to harder hits, I think. Watching the footage back for the first battle, I was complaining that there was no tutorial for the battle system, like any other aspect of the game. Sadly, the nicest looking parts of the game are the battles though. This is where it starts to look like some kind of bargain basement Pokemon game, which to be honest would have played like one if they'd just put some commands on screen for your moves. Strangely, after you fail the first fight, you learn that you need to level up your little wombat friend, and are actually given a tutorial in the second fight encounter. The game sort of works on a rock, paper, scissors style battle system, you know, a bit like Pokemon, but it's not done on what is weak against anything. You have to try and choose the colour attack that the enemy won't use. When they attack back, you need to try and choose the same colour to block. It sounds like a simple system, but this makes the game completely luck-based, as there doesn't seem to be any hints on what your enemy will do. I think this is where the many hours of gameplay comes from, as you will keep losing over and over since it's just down to the RNG gods. I found that even the first enemies in the game were much tougher to take down than you expect, but they do show up on the world map, so you can avoid them if you need to. After trying to grind some experience for my little blue homunculus for what seemed like an eternity, and not getting anywhere, this game broke me, and I bailed. I do not recommend this game if you see it out and about, only pick it up if you're going for a full RPG set. It's honestly not worth the disc it's printed on. Day 25 was the Pervert Simulator. Sorry, I mean Thousand Arms. This is your traditional turn-based RPG, but the main protagonist is a little bit on the creepy side. But aside from that, it does have a real nice presentation with its 2D sprites over a 3D world, but characters are displayed in dialogue and battles with a more anime art style, and it suits the game perfectly. The strangest aspect of the game is it's also part dating simulator, which sadly I didn't get to touch on any of this during the live stream, since as I've said before in these kind of videos, in 2 hours you don't get too far into RPGs. Even though I didn't play too much on the stream of this one, it's one I have been back to a few times, but I've yet to finish it. Even though the main character is a thirsty weirdo, something about the game is quite charming, and feels like it sets itself apart from other games of the era. Sadly, this one never made it to the UK, but I was lucky enough again to pick this one up off of Eddie Rollercore when he was downsizing somebody's collection. It also came as a recommendation from him, so I knew it was going to be a bit different. If there's one RPG I tried out during this year's monthly challenge that I would say you should really try out, it would be this one. You might need to track down a physical though, because it doesn't feel like it would ever get a re-release in today's times. On day 26, I was feeling something a little more casual. I'm a big fan of Tetris, so when I heard about Tricky Towers, and it's almost a reverse Tetris where you're trying to create as large a pile as possible, I was sold. Although the blocks fall like Tetris, when they land, it doesn't mean they're locked in there. The game is physics based, so if your tower starts to get too heavy on one side, it will topple and the run is over. The game has 3 different game modes: race, puzzle and survival. In race mode, you have to build quickly to reach checkpoints to knock back the rising water that is trying to sink your tower. Puzzle mode gives you challenges, such as a set number of blocks, and you have to keep the tower lower than the line shown. This is tougher than it looks, as you quite often have to build out sideways, keeping the tower's weight level. This might have been the mode I enjoyed the most. Finally, the last mode is survival. In this mode, you just have to get as high as possible, aiming to reach checkpoints, but every now and then it will throw pieces at you with weird shapes that will mess up how well your tower fits together, or it will make the upcoming pieces enormous, throwing off the physics. There are multiplayer modes, but I didn't play any of these during the stream. I imagine it's just a head-to-head battle, a bit like Tetris or Puyo Puyo. Sadly, there isn't much else to talk about with this one, but if you love physics-based puzzles and Tetris, don't let this one pass you by. I had a blast with it, even though it turns out I'm pretty crap at it. I played this one through PlayStation Plus, but I'm sure the Switch has a physical version. Since writing this, I've seen there's also a physical version for the PS4, so this is one I'm definitely going to have to track down for the collection. Neon White was a game I'd never heard of before. When I saw its weird, butch, almost furry looking artwork sitting on the game store shelf, I knew it had to come back with me. Anything weird will always find its way into the collection. Well, I have to say though, I was surprised to find out it's a time trial course-based shooter. Closest I could match it to would be the Trials in Mirror's Edge. But this is built more on chaining together combos of shooting and switching weapons, / abilities to keep a fluid momentum until you hit the end of the stage. So far, all the levels I've played have been short and snappy, and if you want to try and better your time, it's quick and easy to do. This is the style of game that really resonates with me, as I get a little obsessed with trying to better each run. You don't get unlimited powers though, you pick them up in the form of cards, which you can switch through on the fly. But this isn't usually necessary for an initial run, as they're laid out mostly in the order you need to scrape through the stage. It's only when you're aiming for the top times that you need to work out different ways to use these powers to break the game apart. There are obvious shortcuts to take, but if you see people playing this online, it's impressive to watch. Not only is there times to beat, but the stages have hidden unlockables, which can be used in the main hub world of the game. Outside of these stages, the rest of the game takes on that oh-so-familiar visual novel aesthetic, with some of the sections dragging on for what feels like forever. But anyway, what about the story? Well, the less we talk about that, the better. It's incredibly weird and seems to have an obsession with talking about the female anatomy. So yeah, the artwork on the front of the case might have been close to what I initially thought. I'd just choose to ignore all the dialogue and just play the stages, as under its strange facade lies a pretty solid and fun game. Visually, the game has elements of that very clean white look to it that Mirror's Edge perfected, but at the same time, looking like something such as the Talos Principle. I hope that description makes sense. Well, it might to the 3 people who've actually played the Talos Principle. I'm going to have to say, if you see this one cheap and love masochistic games, where you spend hours trying to better your time for no reason, grab it. I was genuinely surprised by this one. The chat did find it a bit boring though. I've been working on getting a full worldwide PS2 horror subset for many years, and Ghost Vibration was a game that I was lucky enough to snag cheaply not too long ago. I've always just assumed it was a bit more like a budget version of Ghost Hunter, or some other Ghostbusters style knockoff. I was actually pleasantly surprised though to find out it's more like if Ghostbusters crossed with Luigi's Mansion, and that got spat out as an on-rails shooter. It also has a bit of a Project Zero or Fatal Frame, if you're overseas, ghost discovering aspect to it, where the odd invisible ones will pop up at you, and you need to react quickly. Where it differs from your usual on-rails game is you have to move your character yourself along a set path, choosing to stop where you want to fight the ghosts. The weapon in the game is a sort of ghost harpoon, which you have to latch onto them to slowly deplete their energy. You quite often have to release the ghost you're fighting to knock back any threats that could have lunged at you. It's not an overly deep game, and I don't think it's very long, but I actually had quite a bit of fun with it. Its main frustration is the gameplay relies heavily on memorising the patterns of the ghosts. I died a few times just because something jumped out on me and I wasn't expecting it. and if you die you have to restart the whole level from the beginning. A checkpoint system would have actually made this game way more accessible, but I guess that would have taken away from its arcadey feel. The art style is very weird though. It looks like a cheap Saturday morning cartoon, and none of the audio looks like it syncs up with the characters' mouths. But what do you expect from a janky PAL exclusive? The first play of each level feels like it goes on forever, but when you know what's coming, it really cuts down on the time, as you're not edging forwards looking for ghosts everywhere. Would I recommend this to anyone? Yes, if it only cost a couple of pounds. But at its current price, it's another game where you should just dive into the world of emulation if you're curious. I've not gone back to beat the last level or two yet, but I am looking forward to playing it again. Just not anytime soon. Where these games aren't picked out from the beginning, and I just choose what I feel I want to play that day, I was struggling to find anything for day 29. So my answer to this was let the girlfriend loose in the game room and pick me a game. So yeah, that's how I ended up playing Descent on the PS1. It was a game I actually knew nothing about and picked up in a charity shop years ago. Turns out it's a first-person vehicular shooting/flying game. You're thrown into maze-like levels where you float about, collecting keys and shooting enemies. I have since learnt that it was apparently the first game to feature entirely 3D graphics. Even stranger, it has multiple sequels. I don't know how this series passed me by. Each level requires you to find your way to some kind of core and destroy it. Doing this will trigger a timer, and then you need to rush to the exit, which I found I couldn't ever find. It's not game over if you die in this state. The level is still beaten, but you lose your ship and its contents. By contents, I'm sure it means the prisoners you rescue. But who's worried about them? Being a very early game, it doesn't support twin stick controls, so using the D-pad and shoulder buttons took some getting used to. But it wasn't long before I was semi-competent at navigating the levels. The biggest downside to the game though was it just made me feel a little motion sick after a while. I think it was the floatiness to it, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as some of the first-person VR games I've played have made me feel. To be honest, I enjoyed this one and would happily play it again. I would like to see it brought back with much more modern controls. You never know, there's most likely a PC mod for it, or maybe one of the sequels have addressed this. I'm gonna have to look into this. Stray was a game I was eager to play ever since I saw it announced at a PlayStation State of Play event a long time ago. I missed out when it was available on PS Plus, so I just waited patiently until it dropped enough in price for me to jump on it, as I'd heard it was a rather short experience. Even with its supposed short length, I was hearing it was a must-play game and how amazing it looked. So what type of game is it? It's a sci-fi horror-esque game where you play as a cat in a world inhabited by robots. On booting up the game, a few things stuck out to me immediately. Although it was a pretty game, I didn't think it was as stunning as people had said. I was hearing people tout it was one of the reasons to pick up a PS5, as it was so gorgeous. To me, it was a slightly prettier indie game, which is what it is. Also, I was expecting really fluid movement like the Assassin's Creed games, as cats are nimble and glide over terrain with ease. This just wasn't the case though. Areas you could jump were more context sensitive than anything. I didn't feel it gave you the freedom you were expecting, but at the end of the day, these are just two minor gripes. The game itself was fun to play, but I found the enemies to be more of a nuisance than anything exciting. Most of the time you just have to run from them and survive a certain amount of time, or just sneak past them. There was one bit where I had to wait for an elevator to come down, and spent all my time running backwards and forwards trying to avoid them over and over, and then being caught off guard just as it arrived. This then forced me to do that whole section all over again. From what I've played though, the enemies are only a small part of the game. The majority of your time is spent just searching for items to help the robotic residents, or just taking in the world. It feels like you can take the game at your own pace in these sections, and it actually becomes a relaxing experience. I might be wrong, but I feel the game would have benefited more from being a sort of cat-like walking simulator, rather than having the annoying enemy sections. But that's just most likely me. I enjoy a relaxing game these days. It is a rather linear game, but you do get sections where you're free to explore a small sandbox, such as a town, which all feel very dense and no two streets look the same. It's great to see these robot characters go about their everyday lives, and you soon forget they aren't human. Overall, the couple of hours I played of this I really enjoyed, well apart from the couple frustrating enemy sections, which weren't even that hard really. I just kind of rolled my eyes every time they came up again. I've yet to go back to this and finish it off, as I've been busy with other things, but I'm hoping to see the end of this one by the end of the year. Maybe even go for the Platinum Trophy, but I know there's a speed run involved in that, and they're just the worst. Chaos Break is a game I've always wanted to play, as I love PS1 era survival horror games. It's always been one of these pricey games that I've never had the money for when I see it. So when the girlfriend bought me a copy for Christmas last year, I was thrilled to know I could finally give it a go. So now I have it, I was afraid to damage it. So I ripped it to the computer and emulated it through DuckStation. as any normal person would. It's a game which received really middling to low reviews, and I've seen it pop up on many YouTubers' worst games of the PS1 list. But this to me was one of the reasons why you should always take reviews with a pinch of salt, and if you like the look of something, give it a go anyway. I actually really enjoyed this one. Although it borrows a lot from traditional survival horror games, it doesn't ever really have you feeling underpowered. Instead of the traditional knife you would have to defend yourself, you have full-on beat-em-up style combat at your disposal, as well as a surprising amount of ammo to mow through the enemies. During the stream I didn't realise this and fought as much hand to hand as possible to save ammo. I have since beaten the game and realised shooting your way through it is what the game wants you to do. This makes sense as it's actually a horror sequel to an arcade shooter called Chaos Heat, which to be honest looks like good fun, and I'm going to have to give it a go now. The game has a more Dino Crisis look to it, but with later level Resident Evil style monsters. The game is rather short and the final boss appeared quicker than I thought. It was also a bit of a bullet sponge. I will say the timed sections of the game are pretty strict on your first run. I felt like a timer would just randomly pop up as I was running blind. Since beating the game I've heard that the map tells you where to go at all times, but I never noticed, and honestly the map was small enough to memorise quickly. There is one section where you have to pretty much play a rhythm game to mix some chemicals, and even as someone who really likes those types of games, the timing window was incredibly small to hit correctly, and you had to do this as a timer ticked down. It was quite stressful. Another quick note for anyone who's not into this genre because of the controls, the game doesn't actually rely on tank controls, as it was a later release for the system. Like other survival horror games, you do get multiple characters to play through, but I only ran through once with the woman, Matsuki. But I have seen footage of the man, Rick, and his game is slightly altered, and the voice acting that was already awful takes an even larger dip in quality, which as a survival horror fan, upsets me that I didn't start with him. I love some shit voiceover in these games. Kinda like my videos. Overall, if you're looking for a new survival horror game from that era, give it a go, but I would highly suggest emulating it, as it's not worth its current asking price. I won't say how much that is though, as I've learned talking about prices doesn't age well. I thought this was a good one to end the month on. End it on a big hitter. So there it is, the final part of this year's month-long challenge. Yeah, it took me way longer than I should have to get this final part out. I've got quite a few projects on the go at once, and was closing on finishing my Xbox 360 video, so that took priority. Anyway, these final 11 games, again, were of mixed quality, with the only true stinker being Fallen Stars. I don't know what audience that was actually aimed at. It's too confusing for children, and too crap for anyone who actually plays games for fun. After part 2 of this series, the top 3 games I had played that month were Evil West, Time Bokan, and the Cotton Reboot. Has anything edged its way into the top 3? Yes is the answer. The new top 3 stands at Chaos Break, Time Bokan, and the one I spoke about the least, Thousand Arms. I honestly didn't see the top 3 all being from the PS1, and a mix of genres too. A survival horror, a shmup, and an RPG. I would love to know what games from the series people have played, and from this list what your top 3 would have been. Hopefully people enjoyed watching my thoughts on these games, as much as I enjoyed tackling the challenge. If you did like the video, feel free to let me know in the comments, and hit the subscribe button if you wish. I'll be back again soon with some more in-depth videos. Oh, and my usual pickups. Thanks again for watching. Have fun, people.